things go wrong so much with horses. Horses getting injured, riders falling off, competition's not going to plan. You sort of get used to the chaos a little bit, to be honest, and you learn to roll with it, and it just becomes a little bit part of life. And I think we've had a lot of bad things happen, but then we've had a lot of good things happen, and there's always someone out there that's had it much worse than you, and there's always someone out there that's had it much better than you. So you just keep striving.
Welcome to Practical Horseman's podcast, a show featuring conversations with respected riders, industry leaders, and horse care experts. The show, which runs every other week, is co-hosted by Practical Horseman editors, and our goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. I'm Jocelyn Pierce, and this week's episode is with Olympic eventer Boyd Martin. Boyd Martin is one of the world's leading international event riders and has had competitive success at every 5-star across the globe. Boyd has represented the U.S. at 2 Olympic Games, 3 World Equestrian Games, 2 of which he was the top-placed American rider, and 2 Pan American Games, including the 2019 Pan Ams where Boyd won double gold with Setzer leg, or Thomas as he's known around the barn. This significant win also guaranteed the U.S. team's ticket to the 2020 Olympics. Earlier this year, Boyd recorded his highest placing to date at the formidable Kentucky 3-day event, coming second with Thomas. Boyd has consistently been in the top 10 world rankings since leaving Australia in 2007 and has been on every U.S. championship team since changing his citizenship from Australian to American in 2010. Boyd was raised in a rural area that bordered a national park just north of Sydney that had plenty of space for riding. He grew up in a family that highly valued sports and athletics. Both of his parents were Olympians. His father was a cross-country skier for Australia, and his mother was an American speed skater, who, by the way, met at the 1968 Winter Olympics. Boyd played all kinds of sports growing up and always loved horses. After high school, he knew he wanted to make a career out of riding and moved to the bunkhouse at the New South Wales Training Centre, which he shared with 16 other riders, to become a working student for Heath Ryan. Boyd rode in his first 5-star at age 19 in 1999 and went on to win Adelaide 4 years later. In 2006, he shipped his horse Yin Yang Yo to the U.S. for a try at the Rolex Kentucky event where he placed 11th. He had trained beforehand with fellow countryman and Olympian Philip Dutton and later returned to Philip's True Prospect Farm in West Grove, Pennsylvania to work as his assistant trainer for 2 years before striking out on his own. Today, Boyd and his wife Silva, a Grand Prix dressage rider, own and operate their farm Windurra USA in Cochranville, Pennsylvania. Boyd competes nearly every weekend and coaches a long list of successful riders. He has become a sought-after clinician and in the off-season can be found teaching around the U.S. Boyd's work ethic has always been central in his life and is a big part of his success. When he was just starting out in Australia, in addition to his riding and training business, he sold school books for the family business, picked grapes at the local wineries, and worked as a telemarketer. Later, when he and Silva decided to move their business to the U.S., they had to start all over. And in 2011, Boyd had to overcome great adversity following a devastating barn fire where he lost 6 horses, and the deaths of his father and father-in-law, which followed in quick succession. Boyd and his top horse, Neville Bardos, who was rescued from the fire, defied all odds and made an amazing comeback to finish 7th at Burghley. Boyd says he's never had a plan B or fallback plan and credits that as the reason why he's been so successful. He just keeps grinding away, knowing that failure isn't an option. Known for his wit, humor, and charismatic personality, I always enjoy working on projects with Boyd. When I spoke to him at his farm in early October, which is always flurrying with activity, he was recovering from a fall the weekend before at Plantation Field International and had bone bruising and a torn groin. It's not uncommon for Boyd to be injured. He's had countless broken bones, surgeries, tears, sprains, and strains over his career, and he addresses how he deals with that in this episode. Boyd also talks about what it was like growing up with 2 Olympians as parents, how he met Silva and why they decided to move their business from Australia to the U.S., how he built his business in the U.S. and how it's evolved over the years, his training and teaching philosophies, how he juggles fatherhood with riding, how he overcomes adversity, and much more. But first, I want to thank this episode's sponsor, Dublin. Dublin is an authentic equestrian brand and was created by riders for riders who know what riders need, whether it's on a horse or in the barn. It's the little things that make a big difference when it comes to riding. That's why Dublin products are tested to ensure they not only do what they're designed for, but also make sure you look and feel good. With nearly 40 years of experience, Dublin combines its wealth of technological experience with on-trend fashion. Now let's jump right into the show as Boyd explains what it was like growing up in Australia and how he got into eventing.
For me, I was very, very lucky growing up in Australia. I was from a very sporting family. Both my parents were Olympians. So my dad was actually a cross-country skier for Australia, and my mother was a speed skater for the United States. So I grew up in a very, very sporty family, and it wasn't just horses, it was all sorts of sports. I'd say sport was actually more important for our family than education, which I know sounds funny to a lot, but just thinking back at growing up in Australia, our parents got us into every sport you could have ever imagined, and school sports in Australia is huge. One of our school sports was compulsory to play rugby in the winter and cricket in the summer, and then there was cross-country running, which I was very good at. And then we weren't far from the beach, so surf lifesaving was also a school sport, and I was a member of the Long Reef Surf Lifesaving Club. My mum and dad, obviously, Dad was still doing triathlons, and we actually grew up just north of Sydney. It's about 45 minutes drive from the Harbour Bridge north, and sort of a little bit rural area where we had 3.5 acres, and it was a place called Terry Hills. And there were sort of 5-acre lots and 3-acre lots and 2-acre lots, and horses were a big part of that area. It was sort of bordered right onto National Park, and there was all fire trails through the National Park. And my mum and sister actually got into eventing probably a bit before I started riding, so I went to a couple of the events to watch them. And I'll never forget, actually, there was a pony for sale. There was a horse called Willie, and his show name was Willie Do It. And it was a 13 two-hand Welsh Mountain Cross. Pony for sale for $1,200. And it was on one, where the scores are kept at the competition. It was at Lochinvar. And I begged Mum to come to see if we could come try the horse. And we met the people, and they brought the horse out to the show the next day, and I just hopped on him in tracksuit pants and just went straight to canter and just sort of galloped around the field, did one lap of the field and came back and said, "We'll take him." And we put the pony on the trailer and took him home. And then I joined my sister and to join Forest Hills Pony Club. Pony Club is huge in Australia, so on a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning, it was about an hour to ride to Pony Club, so I had to get up, get on the horse and ride him for an hour to the Pony Club, and then you'd spend all day at Pony Club. Mounted games, jumping, sporting, then you'd tie him up to a tree and have lunch with your friends, and then all afternoon you'd be tent pegging and popping balloons with spears on your horse, and it was just everyone from our neighbourhood had horses, and then by about 4 o'clock, then you'd hop back on the horse and you'd ride him all the way home, and you'd get home just before dark, and it was great. It was a real community feel, and looking back on it, I was by far not the best rider there by any means. It was just a group of kids, and met those kids, and you catch the bus to school and jump off the bus at school on the way home. We'd get off the bus at 3 or 4 o'clock, and then everyone would meet half an hour later on their horses at the end of Taronga Road, and then we'd go racing through the national park, racing each other, and so it was, and this was just another sport that we did, and my parents, I was very, very lucky that my parents were encouraging and supportive, and it wouldn't matter if it was tennis or football or cricket or pony club or whatever. We were just driven to whatever. My parents are just from one sporting event to another, and and I definitely sort of fell in love with horses a little bit once we started eventing, and I was a very good runner at school, and I was a pretty bad student, to be honest. I was a bit hyperactive and just haven't changed much, probably. Just going a million miles an hour, so it was pretty obvious that I wasn't going to be an accountant or a brain surgeon, and and it was just one of those things that towards mid-high school that there was this understanding that this could actually be a career, not just a passion, just a sport, and I loved horses, and so lucky for me, as soon as I finished high school, I moved up to a place called the New South Wales Equestrian Centre, which was a training centre for all the legendary 3-day event riders, and moved in there. I think there were 16 other young riders that moved into the bunkhouse there. And so the day after high school, I became a working student for Heath Ryan, and he had a special course there, and it was a great. I was just lucky that I knew straight away what I wanted to do, and I was also lucky that I didn't have, about when I was 17 or 18 years old, I didn't have any other interest. I didn't even know about university or college. I didn't even think that was an option, or why would you bother doing that? And I was very, very lucky just from the get-go of knowing exactly what I wanted to do, and enjoyed every second of it. I loved the hard work. I loved the camaraderie, and I was in for it, and I was very lucky from an early start that I knew what I wanted to do straight out of the gate.
Can you talk a little bit about, you mentioned both your parents were Olympians. Did you ever feel like any pressure from them to kind of follow in their footsteps and kind of chase that Olympic dream?
To be honest, no. I got two very, very different parents. It's an interesting story. I didn't know this until my dad's funeral, but growing up in our house, there was no trophies or medals or photos of Olympic glory, or so my parents, when my sister and I were born, they chose to take down all the memorabilia of their success in our house. So we, thinking back in our house in Terry Hills, there was no trophies or accolades or certificates or anything that my parents had done. There wasn't even any photos, Olympic photos or anything like that. So, I think parenting is a huge, huge factor in a person's outcome. So I had very different parents. I had two very, very hard-working parents. My mum, the American one, is from Springfield, Illinois. She was very, very competitive. She was definitely. She loved to win. She was very, very driven, and sport was meant to be fun, and it was so much more fun if you won. And I'll never forget, actually, my mum and I competed again in my first preliminary horse trial, and I won it. And my mother was in the same class, and she protested and said that she'd been given the wrong time penalties, even though her son had won. Like, she was trying to protest against my victory. Couldn't believe that, actually, down at Calcutta. So yeah, I had one parent that was, I don't want to say like the Tiger Woods parent, but like a pretty stern, pushing parent that was, I think, a lot of good, successful sports people have that person driving them forward. And then my father was a little bit different. I think he was quite humble, quite quiet, a little bit more, I don't know what the word is, but he loved success, but he wasn't rah-rah-rah. He was very supportive and quiet, and he'd shake hands if you won the running race, but he'd never make a big deal of it and tell you you're a champion or anything like that. And so he was just as supportive and just as competitive, but in a much quieter and more humble way. Probably, it's hard to describe, but probably a little bit more of a secret you know, he was a highly competitive person, but not on the outside. You know, he just looked like a nice, friendly guy that liked to joke. But then if you saw him in his own sport, when growing up, he used to bike race and triathlon. I mean, he'd train so hard and push himself so hard. So that was interesting growing up, you know, having role models like my father that was a little bit quiet but very, very hardworking in his business. He had a bookshop, a family business, which he sold school books, and I mean, he'd just work 7 days a week, and from early in the morning till late at night, and then he'd come home and get on his stationary bike and ride for 2 hours and just dripping with sweat. And so he was good people to look up to. So I was very, very lucky in that department where I had two parents which I think were pushy in their own ways, one in a subtle way, one was a bit more open, and then also two parents that worked very hard in their business and then trained very hard in their own sports. But I never looked at them as Olympic people, and I actually didn't think it was that big of a deal. You know, I thought it was a pretty cool story that my parents met at the Grenoble Olympics.
That's so cool.
Like I never asked them what place they came, or you know, maybe later on I took, you know, when I wanted to come to America, my mum did the same thing. She had to leave her home and go train in Norway, and then my father did the same thing. He had to leave Australia and pursue his goals in another country, and so that was, you know, it came full circle a little bit. But you know, just you know, I think the younger riders that come and work for me or that I coach, the majority of them come from a strong background of their parents. And there are exceptions to the rule. Like there's this kid that works for me at the moment that he'd be as competitive and as hardworking, as driven as you've ever find a kid in the world, and he's had a terrible upbringing. Like he doesn't even know one of his parents. So it's not to say that that's the only way to become a champion, is to have a wonderful start with great parents. There's also definitely other ways, and then it's a hard thing, you know. Like growing up, I think we, you know, the hardest thing with parenting is, do you buy your kid like the really expensive horse and then they go win, and then it gets boring if they're just winning all the time and riding poorly but still on such a good horse, or do you buy them a crummy horse that they have to work hard at improving, but then they never get the taste of victory, you know, like, and it's something that I'm about to go through, I think, with the two kids I've got, is I think my parents gave us a great balance of, you know, not, you know, we had pretty modest horses and were successful, and then definitely there was one or two really nicer horses that we got when it looked like that we were really taking this seriously. So you know, it's definitely a tricky scenario of how much support do you give your kid, and how much do they have to fight for it and work for it and struggle and suffer to make it happen themselves. And so it's a tricky scenario, and I think my parents just got it perfect, where they gave us opportunity, but then we also had to grab that opportunity and go for it.
And your wife, Silva, she's also an athlete. She's obviously a successful dressage rider. Would you mind sharing how you two met?
Yeah, it's a good story, actually. So I was, let's see, it must have been about 2002 or 3. I had just sort of started my own little business in Australia, and I had a small group of horses that people were sending me, and I was actually a telemarketer in the evenings. Yeah, I was selling holidays over the phone. And yeah, I'd never forget, I broke my leg really, really badly on a horse. That's another story. And I would never forget, I had long hair and I was on crutches, and I had a rider called Kate Chatterton, who's now in America. She was helping me ride a little bit, and she was riding some of my horses at a dressage show. And and it was at Alexander Park near Newcastle, and then there was all of a sudden this new fancy imported German Grand Prix dressage rider that had come to work for this big breeding farm called Windurra. And this Windurra was the one of the most famous, or one of the fanciest sort of dressage training facility and breeding facility. It was just down the road from the New South Wales Equestrian Centre. And Silva had her coach in Germany, Rudolf Zeilinger, said, look, if you're going to be any good at dressage, you've got to learn English. So he said, look, I've got some good clients in Australia that buy horses. You can go ride horses there for 3 months and learn English. And so, I saw her at a dressage show, and I was on crutches, and I went up there and said, look, tomorrow's Sunday, and we're going to the Newcastle races, the horse races, with a few mates, and we'd like to come and show you the horse racing in Australia. And she didn't know that much English, and anyway, figured out how to get her picked up, and it was an atrocious idea. We went to the races, and was a mate of mine called Nick Fife was there, another one, Benny Lynch, and we took Silva to the races and got just drunk beer and gambled on horses, and then it got terrible. Then we ended up in a restaurant, and no one had any money, so we had to run away from the restaurant. Then we ended up in a nightclub, and it was that was poor old Silva's first experience with Australian men. And I think I was the best out of the bad lot, considering the group of guys I was with. And anyway, we became good friends, and then Silva did her 3 months, and then she went back to Germany, and then she come back, and I couldn't believe it. She came back, and we sort of teamed up and started our business together, and sort of together for a couple of years, and then got married just before we permanently moved to America.
And what kind of prompted that decision to move to the U.S.?
It was a hard decision, actually. Basically, I think I spent about 8, 9, 10 years in Australia from nothing, working from Heath as a working student and getting the hang of it. And, when I rode my first 4-star when I was 19 years old, and that was a year and a half after I started working for Heath. So I really went from zero right to the top of the sport on a horse called Flying Doctor in no time. And I was very, very lucky. It was a off-the-track thoroughbred horse we bought as a 12-year-old, and it was a jumping, galloping machine. And, we did a 1-star, and 6 months later did 2 stars, 6 months later did a 3-star, and 6 months later did a 4-star. I couldn't believe it, and we bought him as a 12-year-old that had never done an event. Here's my pony club horse, basically. And then, once I got a taste for 4-star, then I, had to figure out how to then turn it into a bit more of a career. And to start with, I couldn't earn enough money to make it happen. So I had I was the telemarketer for half the day for a bit, and then I was picking grapes in the vineyards in the mornings sometimes, and then I was selling school books through the middle of the day for my parents' school book shop. And then eventually you get better and better, and you could then completely just do horses. And then Silva teamed up with me, so we had a good business where she was doing the dressage horses, I was doing the eventing horses, and for 8, 9, 10 years that we actually had a good business going. We had, between us we had 30 horses probably, and we were going to every big show in Australia and New Zealand. Like I was competing at Taupo and Puanui, and buying and selling horses, and then I'd done every big event in Australia, Adelaide, Melbourne, Goondiwindi, all the top 3-star and 4-star events in Australia, and I'd done them over and over and over and again, and I'd won a lot of them too. So I'd been successful. I wasn't the best in Australia though. Like I was sort of the riders sort of just below the top guys. There was riders like Shane Rose and Stuart Tinney and Dave Middleton, and those guys were a bit better than me, but I was the sort of next bracket down. But I'd won a bit, like I'd won Werribee 3-day event, which was a big deal, and competed in New Zealand. And to be honest, we could have stayed there and done well, but I was also a bit bored, or a bit, not bored, but wondering how good I was, or what else was out there. And I had a young horse called Yin Yang Yo that did Melbourne 3-star 3-day event. And he must come second, maybe. And then I decided that I'd like to try Kentucky 3-day event, which anyone on the other side of the world, I mean, for us it's easy. You put him on the trailer and you drive 10 hours down the road and you're at Kentucky. But if you're in Sydney, Australia, it's a massive, massive effort to get a horse to Kentucky or Badminton. Like, it's a huge, huge journey. It's a massive expense. It's going into the unknown. And but I wanted to have a crack at it, and he'd never done a 4-star before. So we sold a dressage horse really well at an auction, and had the money to do it, and put him on a cargo plane. I went with him, and so my first trip with the horse to America was in a cargo plane. Stopped in New Zealand, picked up some trotters, and landed in LAX. And he had to quarantine in LA for 3 days. And I remember just riding him around the streets of LA. I was at this layover stable, thinking, holy moly, this is a different world over here. And then it was in winter. It was in January, and then we flew to New York. And I'll never forget this poor horse. They opened up the hull of the plane in New York, and it was so cold, and the horse, I've never seen a horse shake so much, like when they opened up the side of the plane, and he looked out over the pallet, and his eyes were just, he'd never seen snow before, and he was shaking, and his horse, I couldn't believe it. He's like, what the hell? So luckily for me, a friend of a friend knew Philip Dutton, and they said, yeah, I'll give him a call, you can stable your horse at Philip's farm, and keep him in Pennsylvania and prepare for Kentucky. So came over, I think, 6 weeks before, and straight away I sort of started helping Philip, like cleaning stalls and riding a bit for him. And he gave me a place to live, and then he actually started helping me with the horse. And straight away I knew then he was a brilliant trainer, and obviously he got a wonderful reputation of Olympic glory behind him, and got on really well with him, and did Kentucky and Silva and came over, and then I was just about to go back to Australia, and I said, why don't I leave the horse here and come back at the end of the year and move here? And Philip said, perfect, you can come work for me. Shook hands, went home, told everyone in Australia that we're moving to America, had to sell everything, sold the refrigerator, the horses, you name it. Like, we had to get rid of everything, and everything we worked quite hard for. We had a little apartment, we had to sell that, and kept a couple of horses. Kept a horse called Neville Bardos, and then Silva kept 2 dressage horses called Theopolis Thistler and Jeff the Chef. And then we, took us 6 months to sort of straighten all that out, and got married, and 2 days later moved to America, and Silva got stopped at the customs and said, you're not allowed into America because you applied for your visa here in Australia, you've got to stay in Australia. So we got married, and we didn't see each other for about 3 or 4 months.
Oh, wow.
Until her visa came through. So.
Wow. And then you worked for Philip for a couple of years, and obviously you talked about, you guys have a great relationship. Can you talk a little bit about kind of what you've learned from him?
He's an interesting guy, so it was definitely a change for me. Like, the guy I learnt the most off in Australia is a guy called Heath Ryan, and Heath Ryan goes a million miles an hour. He's shouting and screaming and arguing with people all day, and working 7 days a week till midnight, and it was just a wonderful character. He's a great guy. I still look up to him to this day, and a wonderful horseman, like great trainer of any type of horse, a hot horse, a cold horse, a dressage, just a brilliant trainer, but larger than life. Like, you'd walk into a room and the room would go quiet, and Heath would just start ranting and raving. A wonderful guy. And then moving to America, you go, ride in the indoor with Philip, and he wouldn't say a word all day. Like it was just not what I was used to or what I expected. And a very calm, quiet, driven person, wonderful horseman. Again, could train any type of horse. Wonderful. The thing about him was how focused he was on the job at hand. Like he, only really focused on things that really mattered to his career, which was his top horses, and then to making money to pay for the show. And great mentor, great trainer, great person to learn from now. Even there wouldn't be that many people in America that are genuinely making their money all from eventing and to pay for farms and houses and cars. And he's been a wonderful role model there of how hard you have to work to earn enough money to really look after your family well, and to buy the nice cars and the farm and the horse walkers and the trucks and trailers. And and it's something I admire. I mean, it sounds stupid, but there's not that many people that are genuinely making a great career out of money earned purely from horses. And Philip's been a great mentor that way too. And like as a competition rider, I mean, you wouldn't find a better competitor ever, I think. Cross-country rider, I mean, he's just, even today I'm a bit injured at the moment, and he jumped a couple of horses for me yesterday. And I mean, he'd sit on any horse and make it go. It's and he's turned into a very, very good friend. On top of that, I think we had a healthy relationship while I was working for him, where we weren't best buddies. And I think that's important, not to be too good of friends when you're working with someone. And then after I started working for myself, I think we've actually become better friends. And I hope he helps me out, I help him out. We're wonderful friends with his family and vice versa. And I just think he's going to be one of those people that you look back on your career and that really changed your life. And very lucky that, along the road there, I've had my parents, then Heath Ryan in Australia, and then Philip Dutton here in America, that, some just key people that have made your life different to what it could have been.
Can you describe your overall training philosophy?
Well, it's changed a lot. I mean, the number one thing, training-wise, like when you're starting a business, you've got to take on all comers. You've got to fill your barn up. You've got 15 stalls that you're renting. You better find 15 horses to put them in, maybe even 16. And don't say no to anything. And when I say that is, if someone wants a jumping lesson at 8 o'clock at night, you've got to be there at 8 o'clock at night, teach a jumping lesson. You've got to be driving home from Aiken on Sunday night from the show, and you've got to be there at 6 in the morning to work all the horses that didn't get ridden that day because you're at the show. And it's, so the good thing with me is I think I definitely just went for it. When I first come to America, there would be nothing I wouldn't do. If someone gave me a horse that bucks and bites and spins and is a bit lame, but they wanted to go around to beginner novice at Stewart Horse Trials, I was your man. And I think having that mentality was a great way to get started. However, you've got to be really, really good. You've got to evolve out of that. And I think the hardest thing for me is to try and now, 12 years later, is say, okay, we've got the barn full of horses now. We don't need to be saying yes to every single horse that comes your way. And, you can I rode 18 horses at Fair Hill Horse Trials once, and that was 9 on one day, 9 on the other day. And there's no way you can do a good job doing that. So now you say, okay, you don't need to be riding 18 horses at a horse trial. Let's let's pick 5 horses for this show and then 4 horses for that show, and let's do a really, really good job. So you've got to, training-wise, you've got to be very, very good, I think, is to not say yes to everything. And then also the attention to detail, of really not trying to skip through everything and rush through everything. I mean, it's very hard, though, in this business. There's only so much money that's coming in, and, there's staffing's hard, getting the horses is hard, and, there's a day where I'm injured at the moment, and then 2 of them are off at the show tomorrow, but we've still got to work all the other horses, so people got to understand that it's going to be a long day tomorrow, and, and training-wise, I think in a weird kind of way, it's almost easier to get your business started training horses if you're a bit desperate, you're a bit hungry, and you have no fallback plan. And when I say fallback plan, is there's no trust fund coming in, there's no secret money that's going to prop you up. You have to make it work, and it's a very comforting thing knowing, okay, I've got to figure this out, and they're not, but as I said, as time goes on to get really, really good, then you've got to modify that plan and say, okay, now I want to try and specialise in riding top horses. I've got a great group of owners around me now. Let's try and select really quality horses, but not just buy horse after horse after horse. Training-wise, I think what your question is more is I think that there's a system of training I've learnt through Australia for 10 or 15 years, and now in America here for 12 years, of quietly, calmly chipping away at building horses' confidence up, training them on bringing them up, trying to give them a really good understanding. To do that, you also need the facility. You need a good jumping ring, good jumps, good footing. You need a safe barn that's got good ventilation. Now we have a track here for a mile. It doesn't matter how hard the ground is, we can have the horses fit all year round. We've got a cross-country schooling course in both farms now that we can, if a horse needs to jump in 2 water jumps every day of the week, we can do it without putting them on a trailer. So staffing's huge. I think that's one thing I've learnt from Eric Devander the last couple of years, is having really, really top people managing the horses. Head grooms, I think, are critical. Pay them more than you think you can afford if you can find a good one. Look after them well. It's more than just riding a horse. It's coming up, the whole package, I call it. You need to be a rider that can obviously work ethic and riding ability or natural ability is huge. But then you've got to be more than that. You've got to be able to select horses. You've got to be able to find people to own the horses. You've got to be resilient and be knocked down and get back up. You've got to understand how to get a horse fit that doesn't have very good feet, and how to feed a horse that gets hot and nervous in the dressage but still make him fat and shiny. And this is all things you just have to learn over all years of experience. And I'm 40 years old now, and I'm still learning, but it's taken a while to figure it all out. But I still also got a lot to go, which is good, because I think, I've still got the best ahead of me. So.
And when you're teaching, is there something that you work on the most frequently with students, or something that you kind of see as like common problems that your students have?
Yeah, teaching's a hard thing. The number one thing is you have to teach someone differently. Like I was teaching 2 days ago in Millbrook for the day, and you have to have a slightly different training or teaching technique. Say it's an amateur rider that wants to compete at a low level, loves the horse and wants to enjoy the sport. You have to teach them differently to, say, one of the kids that work for me, that are considering dedicating their life to this sport, that have a horse that could take them to the top, and they're trying to compete at a high level. There's definitely a different way or different system. You have to be, I think, quite definite definite and a little bit strong and sharp, and not strong and sharp, but more precise. Teaching someone that really wants to go on and be good at this. And then obviously a lower level rider, an amateur rider, the thing is safety, I think, and understanding that, look, they jump probably 20 fences every week where I jump 2,000, and of course they're going to not be as accurate as me, and so you've got to be a little bit understanding there. Coaching wise, I think what I do, just thinking about it when I'm teaching, is I basically would regurgitate what I would do if I was riding that horse. So say I'm teaching someone a cross-country lesson, I would run them through the exercises that I would be doing on that horse if I was the rider. So I'd probably try and think of, okay, how would I warm this horse up, and then try and verbally tell them how to warm the horse up. Could then go to particular exercises and then sort of imagine if I was on the horse and tell them how to do it and sit. So I think it's a simple way of teaching, and same with the show jumping and the dressage. I mean, I do a little bit of dressage, but Silva would do most of the dressage teaching. And I mean, I also get coached a lot, and I think I get some great jumping lessons and jumping help from a lot of very, very good jumping coaches, show jumping and cross country, and I think they definitely influence what I teach. And the weeks after, they've helped me, and they'll pick on something that I haven't picked up on, and then that'll make a real impact on what I'm thinking about, and then I'll probably head down that way of teaching that exercise or that system of riding. So,
and you've obviously had some amazing horses throughout your career. Can you talk about, some of the most important ones or some of your favorites?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so lucky. I've had just had some legendary horses. Obviously, the one that got it started was Willie Do It. The next horse after that was Lenny's Loss, and he had no front tooth. And a good horse. He didn't go on the bit, but a great jumper. And then after that was Flying Doctor, who was, I was 17 years old, and I fell off him when I tried him, and he didn't run away. So my dad said, "Let's buy him," and $1,200, and took me around my first 5-star. Going fast forwarding from that one, obviously the horse that won the last long format 4-star in the world was a horse called True Blue Tuzak, and that was a top horse. And I mean, I wish I had that horse today. He was just an outstanding animal, brilliant in all 3 phases. And that horse, True Blue Tuzak, or Tuzak as I called him, he's the one that sort of got me to the top of the sport. That one was the one that really that I've won the big. I was sort of no one up until I won that Adelaide 4-star, and that was the one that sort of cracked me into the big time. And then obviously Yin Yang Yo was the horse that I brought over from Australia. And then the mighty Neville Bartles. He's still alive actually. He's one of the girls that work for me ride him every day. He's again not a real talented horse, but a trier and a real gutsy animal, and just a legend. Bought him as a resale project in Australia, and did it all. Did WEG and the Burley, a couple of Kentuckys, good one. And then going forward from that, after Neville, then I really got the hang of it all, and then just had great championship horses. So after Neville was Otis Barbotier at London. 2 years later was Chamois, Normandy, and then Pancho Villa, I think, went to Pan Am's after that, and then after that we had Blackfoot Mystery at Rio. After that, what was that? The WEG. No, the WEG there with Sesteleg, and then again the Pan Am's with Sesteleg. So I've been blessed now with a run of top horses. And funny enough, the ones that the ones that I fall in love with aren't the fanciest ones, but the ones that try the hardest and the real gutsy ones. I mean, the fanciest horse, not by far, the most talented or fanciest horse I've had is Shamwari. Just unbelievable movement and great cross-country horse. Not the greatest show jumper, but good enough. And then I had some wonderful jumpers. You know, Trading Aces was a brilliant jumper. It got sold as a show jumper at the end. And great horses like Crackerjack and Welcome Shadow that were just gutsy triers and tough horses that went around the world. And so thinking of it, I've had a really, really good run of horses. And I think in my barn at the moment, I think I've got the best yet to come. So it takes a while to build them all up, you know, when you're selecting young horses and then you put them in your program, and it takes a few years to build them up from training to prelim to intermediate, and then they get hurt, and and then one's not quite good enough, and then one that you don't think's much good then all of a sudden blossoms and surprises everyone. So I'm very, very lucky.
And obviously we've touched on this a little bit. You've had a lot of competitive success throughout the years. Is there a particular competition or, success that's meant the most to you?
I think it's all a bit of a blur now. I mean, every time there's a big competition, you get so dialed in for that particular competition. You think it's the last competition in the world. And I mean, at the moment I'm injured. I fell off last weekend and I'm limping around with a bone bruising and a torn groin, and Fair Hill 3-day events 2 weeks time, and it's miserable, and you think, oh my God, Fair Hill, I've got 3 horses that could win it, and this is the be all and end all, and a couple of years later you forget whatever, so I mean, I've competitions, obviously the Olympics and WEGs are huge for us, and I'd even throw the Pan Ams into that. I think riding for your country is huge, and it's also a moment where you really, especially the Olympic Games, the whole world stops and has a look at your small little bubble of the sport. So that's good. And then for me, the big 5 stars, I really thrive on giving my best at the Kentuckys and Badmingtons and Burleys and Poes and soon to be Fair Hills. That's what I really live for. And they, I love riding them. They're the top of the sport. It's so hard to get a horse there. And then once you get to that competition, it's so hard to just get around well. And then to win it is, I've only won one, and I've come second and third a bunch of times, but it's just, it's so hard. And I admire those riders that have won again and again and again, because it's truly, truly hard to get a horse to that level and then keep it going for a long period of time. And then, these courses are getting so difficult now just to get around clear and under the time is a huge, huge effort. And a great reflection on someone's training of the horse and their riding ability under pressure in the moment.
Do you have any sorts of routines before you compete? Or are you superstitious?
No, definitely I don't. I got one superstition. I don't drink alcohol for about 3 months before a championship, and mostly, and again for 5 stars. So, and it's been an interesting one. Like everyone, to start with, I think I just did it because to lose a bit of weight, and then to be honest, I find I just feel better and sleep better and feel sharper and more focused, and it's something that's worked for me. And I'm not a we go on the trips to the championships and the WEGs and that, and a lot of the riders will have a beer at night, which it doesn't bother me at all, but it's just something that's worked for me. And it just makes me feel much more sharper and more focused and dialed in for a big competition. So that would be, I don't know if you call it superstition, but that would be something that and it's good for me. I mean, I'm a person of extremes, it's all or nothing, and so it's a good way to get a little bit healthy and sharp, and for 5-6 months of the year not drinking alcohol over a long period of time is probably a healthy thing for me. and then so superstitions, and then routines. I mean, it's the good thing with me is, well, the good thing in what I do is every weekend I'd be competing. So I'm competing so much now that I don't really have to think I get nervous, but I'm so used to being nervous that I completely accept that feeling of terror, take a deep breath, and I'm quite comfortable, and it's familiar, and it's hard, I think, for some people that only compete a little bit because that feeling's foreign to them, where that feeling for me is every weekend, and I don't want to say you get numb to it, but you get used to it, and then you get used to being in control of it a little bit. And cross-country wise, I think jumping, thousands and thousands of cross-country jumps every month, it becomes subconscious. You don't have to think. And I think, coming to around a cross-country course, I don't have to think to get my horse back to a coffin canter for the cough, and I don't have to make myself look for a forward distance to a ditch brush. It's something now I've just done it so much for years and years and years, thousands and thousands of jumps, that it's coming more automatically now. And I mean, I think with that, there's a little bit of a danger of complacency. So you've got to make sure that you're not taking everything for granted. And sometimes you'll see the good riders slip up at something they shouldn't really slip up at, and I think it's that reason. Yeah. And then I definitely think here at Windurra, we work very, very hard. And it's something, the system I grew up with, working at Heath's and then working at Phillips, is we definitely grind it out. It's a long, hard, grueling day, 7 days a week, 12 months of the year, and the guys that work for me, I take my hat off to them, because there's much easier jobs out there, and they probably pay more too. Yeah. And they somehow, I think they understand that the system we use works and produces success, and there's no way around the hard work. There's just I can't find a way of doing it without putting in the hours.
And then it's definitely safe to say that you've had more than your fair share of injuries. How do you kind of deal with that when you're injured, and then how do you bounce back?
Yeah, I mean, I hate being injured. It's just, but I've also accepted that this is just part of it. And I think definitely the last 5 or 6 years, I've had to start looking after my body a bit better. I would spend a lot of time and money on my body every week. So on a Monday morning at 6:30 a.m, I go to the chiropractor, and then she also then makes me strip down to my underwear, and then she's got a class 4 laser, and she lasers all of my hips and my back, and it's freaking painful.
Is that?
Yeah. And so that's every Monday morning. Well, most people are tired and sleeping in after the show. I've got to do that, and then I go straight from there to the personal trainer, and I work out with Linda Brown, who used to be a jockey and works on my core strength.
Oh, cool.
And then, usually on Fridays we do yoga, and then, at the moment, when I'm a bit injured, like I am at the moment, I'm getting acupuncture once a week, and then I've got myself a bit of exercises every morning. Like I get up and try and get down to the basement with young Knox, and I've got sort of 20 minutes of warming up exercises and stretching and stuff like that. And, just put in an ultraviolet light sauna in the bathroom now, so I sit in that, and drink the isogenic shakes for breakfast, and try, but I still get hurt, and there's no way around of falling off and getting driven into the ground. And I mean, the good thing, I don't think I ride as many bad horses anymore. So, and then I got 1 or 2 younger riders that do the younger horses, which I think they're the ones you get hurt on a lot when they're good horses, but they'll trip or spook or bump a leg or run off a jump and trip over. And so I've got a couple of fit young lasses and lads that do them, and I'm on the ground shouting them. For a collarbone or an arm or whatever, I find they're easy. Like they don't bother me too much. It's get a surgery or whatever, and it's a week later you can ride well again. But anything like in your ankles or broke my leg or my hip or whatever, that's there on my back. I've had my back injected a few times. They're the worst because you can't ride properly, and then you're desperate to keep riding, and you want to try and ride at the big competitions, but you can't. You can't. So, I mean, it's just you got to keep reminding yourself you eventually get better, and having good riders around you that can keep your horses going, and also keep reminding yourself that eventually you do become good. But it happens in slow motion. And time takes its time when you're hurt, which is it's not fun. Because whenever I'm working really, really hard, I always think, wouldn't it be nice to be injured at the moment? I'd be sitting on the couch, and whenever I'm injured, I hate it. I'd do anything to be riding again.
And throughout your life, you've overcome a lot of adversity, and you've had a lot of challenges that you've come up against. How do you kind of push through when things get really tough?
I mean, two things. I mean, I think your upbringing, obviously it's learnt behaviour. I think of when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And so I think from a very young age, growing up in the family I grew up in, I think you learn to keep fighting or keep pushing on. And then the reality, because I get asked this a bit actually, the reality is I don't really have a choice. You know, there's no fallback plan. There's no, you know, we have to come up with a large amount of money to pay our mortgage every month. We're in so deep now that there's absolutely no way out of this but to work through it, you know, and I'm quite comfortable with that idea. I'm quite happy with it, and it doesn't, you know, we owe a couple $1 million and it doesn't stress me out, but there's no backup plan. It's not like I should be at university doing an arts degree, you know, or one parent saying, oh, why don't you take some time off and hang out at the beach with us, or, you know, there's just, I'd like to give you an answer where I tell you that I look at myself in the mirror and pump my chest and, you know, have a cold shower and say, come on, but it's, I mean, I think I just learnt just to, I mean, things go wrong so much with horses, you know, horses getting injured, riders falling off, competition's not going to plan. You sort of get used to the chaos a little bit, to be honest, and you learn to roll with it, and you know, it just becomes a little bit part of life, and you know, I think we've had a lot of bad things happen, but then you know, we've had a lot of good things happen, and there's always someone out there that's had it much worse than you, and there's always someone out there that's had it much better than you. So you just keep striving on, I think.
Now that you have 2 kids, how do you kind of balance your career with your family?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very, very interesting thing having a couple of kids. I mean, it's definitely changed a lot here. I mean, the reality, the sad part, no, not the sad part, the reality is I think it has a much harsher effect on the mother than the father, you know, and I think Silva's career as a dressage rider, she had a fall and a brain injury, which definitely really slowed her career up horse-wise for a good year and a half, and then having 2 kids, I think's really put a half halt on Silva's dressage career, and you know, for me, it's definitely changed a few things. I think it's, you know, you get caught a little bit sometimes thinking the whole world revolves around you, and it's I'm the Olympian, I'm the Olympian, and I'm going to ride my horse at this time, and then I'm going to teach a lesson at that time, and me, and then all of a sudden you've got a couple of kids, and you know, you've got to grab one from school, and I think you also don't want to be that sort of person that's so consumed in their career that you don't have the time to be a dad to your kids. So it's been a hard one for me a bit, because I think I was on my way up. I was relentless in what I do to try and be as good as I can, and nothing else actually mattered. I think I just 100% 7 days a week wanted to be the best in the world, and now I think if you have that mentality, you kids will hate you and you get divorced pretty quick. So I think there's got to be a moment where you have to try and get things wrapped up by, hopefully by 5 o'clock in the afternoon, so you can spend a couple of hours with the kids. And we're lucky here. We live at the farm, and so we've got a nanny that comes in at 7:30 every morning and takes over. And the kids, Knox is 4 years old now, and he's out there helping in the barn and running around the farm a bit. So it's I can be teaching a jumping lesson and he'll be climbing on the show jumps and spooking the horses. And we're a little bit fortunate compared to other riders that their home might be down the road and they're trying to, mum's at home with the kids and then the husbands, or vice versa, at the barn riding. And we're pretty blessed. But yeah, it's a funny thing, and that I think it's very important to try and do a very good job being a parent, but at the same time, I've still got good 10 or 15 years of time here where I could try and be very, very good, and I think it's important to keep striving for that, and then also do a good job being a parent.
Do you have any hobbies out of the saddle?
Not really. I mean, it's I know that sounds a bit sad and sick, but it's for me. My 2 kids, like I take Knox to ice skating lessons and swim lessons at night, and it's, I suppose you call one of my hobbies is moving the cross country jumps on the schooling course around. I love the farm here. If I, work at small little projects around the place, and I'm lucky. My hobby is horses, and I get paid for it. So I'm very, very lucky, and I don't really have time or energy. I mean, I do a fair bit of fox hunting in the winter, November and December, and I mean we're lucky here. We've got friends that are not horsey, that are farmers or that are in the area, neighbours and stuff with young kids, and I think it's important to try and then also just get away from the whole circus of the eventing world of competitions and horses, and I love it almost too much. I think it's important to get away from it now and then.
Well, thank you, Boyd. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening to this week's episode, and thanks again to the sponsor of this episode, Dublin. Join us again in 2 weeks. Upcoming conversations are with Olympic show jumper Laura Kraut, husband and wife team Carlton and Tracy Brooks, and World Equestrian Games team gold medalist Adrian Sternlicht. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, please rate and review the show. I'm Jocelyn Pierce, and you've been listening to the Practical Horseman Podcast.